Hey everyone, watching live or listening or watching later. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. And we are enjoying doing these live streams in the run up to the election 1 week from today. So I am on today with Charlotte Swasey, who is the VP for something and something polling and data or something.
Data and polling
Data
and
and polling
data.
for the Data for Progress. But tonight is going to be talking us about the very exciting election night integrity project. So hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
So let's start with a little bit about your background and how you got into this, what I think is super, super cool, but I might be a nerd thing with data and politics.
Yeah. So my background is kind of like political science, polling. I used to kind of be really focused on election forecasting. I've been around politics for 4 or 5 years now. And I've always kind of been interested in doing surveys. Like I think I have the best job in the world because I ask people questions professionally. Like that's my whole job.
I do a lot of that too. I just don't get paid for this.
Yeah, so I've been interested in that for a couple of years. And then as a consequence of being really involved with forecasting work and kind of election predictions, started getting into what's known as election night reporting, where they stick you in a windowless conference room with a bunch of very stressed out people and you process election results as they come in so that you can give everybody updates for like, we're winning, we're losing, where this county is being weird, like we need volunteers here. And then now in my newish role at Data for Progress, I'm running the Election Night Integrity Project, which is kind of taking that experience of like windowless campaign boiler room and bringing it to a more general public audience now that folks are really looking at election results in this kind of detailed way. We're trying to kind of provide a public tool so that folks can hopefully not have the same experience, but get the same kind of insights without needing to be in a conference room the whole time.
Yeah, so I can't speak for our whole audience, but I tend to panic less the more I know. So even if things are going badly or not the way I want them to, it helps to really sort of have a lot of information. So talk to me then about the what this election night integrity project is, what the sort of data dashboard piece of it is, and all the kinds of data that we're going to be able to see on election night.
Yeah, so the Election Night Integrity Project is a public dashboard and then also kind of an educational effort. It lives on our website at 2020.dataforprogress.org. And if you go into that link, what you'll see first is this kind of national view. Right now, it's got early vote data in it. So you can click around and be like, wow, Texas, like 80% of the votes cast in 2016 have already been cast. That's a lot of turnout. And then you can also use our handy dandy simulator to get a picture of what it'll look like on election night. So on election night, we're going to be pulling in results data. So state by state, votes will flow in, lines will go up, states will get sorted as they get called eventually. So we have that. And then the most important thing, in my opinion, is that we also are trying to use previous cycles worth of data to provide context. So one of the first things you'll see is that we're comparing everything to how many votes were cast in 2016. How did people vote in the last election? If you look at, I love our little progress charts where you can literally see as votes come in, kind of progress towards these lines that will show you how many Republican votes, how many Democratic votes, et cetera, were cast last time. So that is the kind of data viz part of it. And then we also have our guides. So we've got Election Night 101, Election Night 201. I think I'm putting 301 up soon. And those are like, if you've never looked at election night results before, which, I mean, a lot of people haven't, because why would you? This is kind of a niche thing. Just explaining some of the intuition around things like voting takes a long time, counting takes a long time. You can't really use precincts reporting anymore. Normally we're like, how many geographies do we have data from? And now the question is like, what type of ballots have been counted? So you can find all that on our website. And on election night, I'm going to be hanging out on Slack with some other folks, and we're going to be putting commentary, bits of info, anything we feel is super relevant up there.
So what are the kinds of things like how does it compare if someone were going to turn on, I don't know, ABC or whatever on election night and just see a bunch of talking heads? Like how is this a different kind of in a way more grounded experience than what they would get doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is that like we are not obligated to have something to say the whole time. So there will be large parts of time where like there's just not a lot you can really say. If you look at our dashboard, it'll be like, oh, we have a small number of votes and that's it. Like here are the
Yeah.
2016 results, but we don't know anything. And I think the comfort with showing uncertainty is what really sets us apart. Because that's a hard thing, right? Like if you're talking to an audience, you want to give them sort of certainty and information really fast. And we've tried to get to a place where we're comfortable with the fact that that's just not possible. So we have no forecasts, we have no needles, we have no percentages. You'll just see the votes themselves as they roll in, and it should be pretty clear where we don't have enough information to make a strong call.
And where does the data actually come from?
Yeah, so the feed we're using is the AP feed. This is so the AP is like a news organization. They aggregate together election results from different states. They literally hire a ton of people to like go and gather these bits of data. And then they put it into an API and then they send it to us and then we put it up. It's pretty commonly used by news organizations, anyone who's kind of using live data. So that's like the kind of closest to a canonical single source we could get. So that's what we're using.
So then you said like close enough to make calls. So are you going to be making calls or are you going to be using AP's calls or what does that look like on election night?
Yeah, so we're not making calls at all. We're using the AP's calls, but we have put in functionality where if we think those are premature, we can delay showing them until we feel a bit more confident in them. In an ideal world, we won't use that at all. Like in my like dream election night, I don't touch that. It just they flow in, everything's great. But we wanted to make sure that we're like reviewing them because there have been cases like in 2018, there was actually a bug in the AP's House results, which resulted in them pushing out calls for a bunch of races where there was a teeny tiny amount of data. And a call here is literally like a 1 in a column saying that it's been called. Like it's a super easy bug. And so there was a half-hour period where everybody's updating House forecasts swung really Republican and people started freaking out. And then they fixed it and then it all rolled back. So because of the experience of like being in a conference room while that happened, we put in some tech to just give us a little more control. But otherwise, we're not going to be deviating from their calls, we don't think.
So how much data would you need to see or what sorts of data, what quality of data would you need to see to feel comfortable that the call that they're making is not premature? Like what would you base that on?
Yeah, so for me, it really depends on the state. Like the assurance I want is that the data they're working off of is actually a sample of the full set of ballots and not just whatever ballots got counted really early. So normally kind of the way you think about this is that you'll get results from, let's say there's some county you care about. You get results from one precinct in that county. Those results are 5 points more Democratic than you expect. You're like, okay, that's kind of a random sample. Whole county is probably 5 points more Democratic than I expected. Here's what that means for the state. Now, every time you get results like that, you have to look at them and be like, well, is this just mail results? Is this early vote? Is this in person? Is this a mix? How are they counting and what order are they counting? And so the thing I'm really looking at is for those calls to be made at a point once the states have sort of reassured us that they've counted like a sample of all of these different types of vote. And again, this wasn't really that much of a thing in previous cycles. Like, sure, you had absentee ballots, but it wasn't at the magnitude it is now. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for is once we are at the point where the state is saying like, all right, we've started counting every relevant type of ballot, then I'll start to feel better about calls.
Yeah. So I know in 2018, when I was watching things come in, the very first states that started to get results were Kentucky and Indiana.
Hmm.
And so as a Democrat, they didn't go very well. And I was like
Hmm.
immediately like, oh no, the night is over.
Oh
The sky
yeah,
is
yeah. It's
king. How do we sort of prepare ourselves for what sorts of data we might get early, what we might not get early, how we should sort of think through, living with that uncertainty and knowing that things are still uncertain and it doesn't reflect what the whole country is going to do?
yeah. So I think there's two parts of this. Part one is using those baselines. So this is actually why we've built into our dashboard showing previous results. Because if you don't know a state really well and like, I don't know each house district, they'll be like random districts. If it comes in super Republican and I'm not staring at the previous vote results, that freaks me out. But what we're trying to do is have in there like, all right, it came in 10 points Republican this time. Last time it came in 15 points Republican. So like that's actually good.
Yeah.
So we're trying to have that right there for people. So when you get results from Kentucky, anywhere like that, you kind of know what the baseline is. The second part is sort of the order in which results roll in. So typically, obviously, the polls close at like 7, 8 p.m. ish local time in each state, which means you have this like sweep of results across the country. So you start getting East Coast stuff, and then you're like waiting on the polls in California to close 3 hours later. And then like Alaska closes super late. Um, and then layered on top of that, this cycle are all these questions about like speed of counting. So right now we think that like Pennsylvania, for example, is probably going to be super slow. Like they've had kind of restrictions on how they can start processing ballots. So doing things like checking them for signatures and making sure they're valid before election day. I don't think they're allowed to start counting them before election day at all. We fully expect there to be litigation. Whereas Florida is a little bit more like they have this smooth system. They're kind of processing ballots ahead of time. We think that they're pretty well set up to count fairly quickly. So it's those two factors. So it's both like literally how late in the night is it, and then also like which states have a really smooth system for counting in place. I think I just heard that Wisconsin is starting to say that they're not going to have anything until like 2 to 4 in the morning, East Coast time. So it's going to be really late.
Could be a really long night, guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I always tell people is like, if you're not acting on this information, go to bed. Like, play a soothing video game, get a book, go to bed. But I fully acknowledge that people aren't going to do that. So I just want them to know that they can.
Yeah. So the other thing I think about the experience of watching your dashboard that's different than watching like ABC News or something is there's going to be so much attention on the top of the ticket on the presidential
Mm-hmm.
race and a fair amount, I would think, on the Senate because the Senate's going to be a really big deal. I imagine a whole lot of news stations are going to basically ignore the House, but you've got all 435 House
Mm-hmm.
seats and what's happening with them on your dashboard so people can watch that in real time. Talk me through a little bit about what that might look like as those come in, how it might show up in sort of a visualization.
Yeah. So, like you said, we're doing presidential, Senate, and House. We kind of had to stop there just because we didn't have the engineering capacity. Like, state ledge is enormous.
Yeah.
I've done it in the past. It's kind of just a massive amount of work, something like 5,000 races, which was just not in scope. So, yeah, when you're watching each of these, like, House is kind of fun to keep an eye on because they happen in this way where like you're kind of waiting for the same states for presidential and Senate. You're like, okay, Illinois hasn't reported, or like I don't know, Texas hasn't reported. Like I'm waiting on Texas. House, you'll start getting districts popping up. You get some called really early because they're like super Democratic, and that always is kind of like a nice feeling when you see one get called. um, and then again, like I know people aren't super keyed into the House this cycle because it's a little bit less of a question and it's like less in play, but it's still hugely important. And we kind of wanted to make that available to folks. The other thing is I think the context is even more important for House races. Even if you're a huge nerd who knows a lot about like, here's where Florida falls, here's where Pennsylvania falls, here's where Wisconsin is. Like, you're not going to know like Minnesota's second unless it's like your job to, or you're like really, really into it. So
a really big nerd.
yeah, I mean, I'm terrible at keeping those in my head. So again, just for me and for other folks like me, we have that context there. So you can kind of click through and be like, okay, here are like Democratic districts, Republican districts, like kind of marginal ones that I'm going to keep my eye on.
Yeah. So you mentioned the other thing that you're tracking already right now is sort of how many early votes are coming in compared to what their total votes looked like in 2016.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that and what you're already seeing. We can't predict anything from vote numbers on who's going to win, but in terms of sort of what the voting is just going to look like all over the country, what are you seeing so far?
Yeah, I mean, the thing we're mostly seeing is just absolutely massive early vote turnout. Like, I can't emphasize enough how enormous this is. We fully expect that in some places like Texas will probably actually cross 2016, like the number of votes in early vote, which is huge. And a lot of that is, again, like it's because there was this massive expansion of access to it because there's a pandemic. Like, this is not the same situation in which you would early vote in a previous cycle. So it does make it really hard to read like what that actually means, which is a lot of what I worry about right now is like, how do we actually interpret this in this completely novel situation where people are early voting because they don't want to go to a polling place on election day because there's other people there and they don't want to get sick. Mm-hmm. So the things I do feel comfortable saying are, one, turnout's going to be super high. The number of people are kind of eyeing that's like almost like the pie in the sky turnout number is 160 million. I think New York Times, like Nate Cohn came out saying like 154 pretty recently. So we'll see where we land there. And then we're also thinking about like how it's going to influence the results on election day. So the early vote has been heavily, heavily Democratic. That was kind of expected when you had a Republican president telling people not to early vote. So the open question now is like, on election day, what will the turnout in person look like? Will it be as sky high as early vote? Will it be kind of depressed because it's raining, it's cold, something happens, there's like a weird news cycle? Will it be somewhere in the middle? Like, that is kind of the key thing that we're going to be watching, is just, we have this massive set of votes already banked, and then we have this completely unknown set. So we're going to be keeping a really close eye on those as they roll in.
And different states do it differently, right? Some are going to release the early vote first. Some that might be toward the end. Like it's going to be a little unclear if you're not paying super close attention what that actually means.
Yeah. Yeah. And different states also have kind of different partisan compositions in their early vote. So I've been looking at Texas a lot recently, and their early vote is like, it's swings Democratic, but it's kind of balanced. It was something like Biden 54, Trump 45 among early vote, and then like Trump up by like a point or two in the non-early vote or something like that. Because they have early in person, so you can like go to a polling place and fill it out, and that leans a bit more Republican. Whereas other places where it's pure vote by mail, it's even more heavily Democratic. So even across states, it kind of has different implications and different compositions, which makes any analysis of it really, really hard.
So do you expect, I know there's always drop off from the top of the ticket, people who only vote, maybe the president, maybe the Senate, drop off a little bit. Do you expect in such super high turnout that might be even more this year, that there might be more drop off? Do you think that people are, this is pure speculation, I know, but that people maybe are a little better educated now and are going to be voting further down the ticket? I mean, I just, it's so interesting to think with such high turnout compared to other years, what that might look like.
Yeah. So, I mean, one trend we have seen is that down ticket voting has increasingly kind of become aligned with top of the ticket voting. So if you look back at Virginia in 2017, their like off-cycle state legislative elections looked a whole lot like the votes that were cast in the 2016 presidential. And that's actually pretty unusual. Like previously, you had much more differentiation between the bottom of the ticket and the top of the ticket. So we're seeing kind of a reduction in ticket splitting overall. And I'm not quite sure if that'll impact how many people go down ballot, but it does seem like people are sort of bringing their down ballot preferences in line with their top of the ticket, or at least their partisanship. We're also seeing the situation where there's places where Trump is actually doing worse than like the Republican Senate candidates. We're seeing drop off from him that doesn't necessarily extend to like Cornyn, for example. But I don't expect that like there will be, I think people are pretty educated and pretty like engaged and will at least kind of go with their partisan preference down the rest of the ticket.
Yeah. Until you get to the, I live in Chicago, and so until you get to the part of the ballot that's like,
the judges,
don't
there's
keep
like,
this judge, keep it.
I lived in Chicago a couple years ago and was like, oh my God.
It's even for people who spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, it is just a lot of work to get through.
Yeah, having voted in Chicago where you have all those judges, and then in California where you have like 15 ballot propositions that you're not sure what they mean, it's like, I understand why folks drop off.
Yeah, definitely. So then sort of just give us the big picture. How are you going to be keeping yourself from panicking on election night? What are the sort of things you're going to be reminding yourself of, looking at closely to just sort of keep perspective on everything?
Yeah. So for me, I think the biggest thing is just to understand the timeline. So we're going to wake up on election day. People are going to be voting. We're going to have no new information other than like, it's raining in this place. There's a long line over here, like whatever. It's going to be 7 p.m.-ish. Polling places are going to start closing. We're still not going to have any information. It'll be like, okay, the polls are closed. We're counting. We're still counting. Cool. And then maybe like 11 p.m., probably earliest, we're going to start getting enough information to even think about calls. So for me, like, I'm just really bracing for that timeline. And like election days are hard. You're sitting around and you're like, well, the poll's closed. Like, let's go. There's nothing else I can do here. But I'm just trying to remind myself that we're already hearing like that it's going to be a really late night. We're hearing from Wisconsin, like 2 to 4 in the morning, maybe. Like,
come on, Democrats win Texas, so we don't have to wait for Wisconsin.
I know. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, so for me, I'm trying to kind of stay calm, stay like flexible. Obviously, I'll be updating our dashboard and putting up content as I see it, probably fielding text messages. Like, again, I'm not running a war room or like I'm not running a election night reporting room on a campaign, but like I fully expect my group texts are going to be like blown up. But I'm really hoping we can direct folks to at least put their frantic refreshing on our page, where you can hopefully have the very soothing color scheme and the comfort of not a lot going on, rather than look at anything that's going to move around really quickly, because that freaks me out. Yeah. Also, I'm going to have a book. Like, strongly recommend getting a book.
Good advice. Good advice. You can also, of course, everyone tune into the live show that Two Broads Talking Politics, Electorate, and Mueller, She Wrote are doing jointly. And we are going to pad the front part with just entertainment.
That's wonderful.
So you don't, because I know no one's going to be able to think about anything but the election, but you know, you're going to want to tune in, but there won't be a whole lot to know yet. So
yeah, I'm
get
trying
some
to
entertainment.
I'm trying to convince my staff at Data for Progress that we should just play Group Among Us, you know, the little like video game.
Yeah.
For like election day until we start getting results. So we're not like just on Twitter, because that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. Stay away from Twitter. Eat dinner with your families. All right. Well, that is very good advice. Do you have anything else that you want to make sure we talk about?
No, I think just I want to kind of have folks braced for the fact that this is a weird election and that it's going to take a long time. You're going to hear a lot of nonsense. Like, I promise you, if you go on Twitter, someone's going to have a very interesting calculation where they're like, from 3 votes here, I've projected. Just don't engage with that. It's not helping you. Yeah, and try to stay calm and remember that like we are going to count every single vote and that the results will get certified by the states on their timeline when they feel good about it. And to just as much as you can get yourself mentally set up to wait for that.
And find some down ballot races that you care about that might get called earlier so you have
Yeah.
something to latch on to.
Watching like state legislative candidates or like
Yeah.
commissioners, city council, whatever is so fun because like I love the DLCC's Twitter feed because they'll be celebrating races the whole night, like people you have never thought about in places you've never thought about. And it's always really exciting because like these are the people who are going to be making change in their local communities and in their states. So yeah, check them out for like a not soothing, but like measured excitement Twitter
Yes.
follow.
Yes. Amanda Littman told me today to Run for Something is going to be doing the same thing on their Twitter feed with
Amazing. I
lots of down
love
ballot
that.
stuff. So yeah, watch those for fun. So, all right. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me today. I love data, love data. So this is a super exciting project, and I, for one, will be watching it closely all night, into the morning, into the next morning, whenever it takes to find out what's happening in the election.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm glad we can